Today we're touching episode 114, and the topic of episode 114 is life after college. What happens when you enter the workforce? For those of you that don't know HTC, we're a podcast that centers around telling the stories of first generation college students, high school students, and young professionals that recently enter the workforce. With that, I wanted to take the pleasure of introducing a good friend of mine, Collins Ogogor. I've known Collins for a number of years now, and he fits the mold perfectly of a young professional that's kind of figuring their way out of getting into the workforce and life after college. So, with that, I want to let Collins introduce himself and go from there.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Adnan. I appreciate the segue and the introduction. I am Collins Roosevelt E. Ogagor. As Adnan said, we've been good friends, and I currently work for Dow Chemical as a supply chain planner. My educational background uh, is a very, very humble but a hardworking one. I went to Prairie View A&M University, and I got my chemical engineering degree. I did a concentration in bioengineering, and before that, I went to Lone Star College and got my Associates of Science. So went the junior college route, then graduated from a 4 year, and found myself at Dow. Straight out of school, I started as a process engineer, and I would say that that segue into the workforce, especially given the time period, it was very, very unique. It was very, very interesting, and it taught me a lot. Right, um, during that time, I graduated in May 2020, so it was right in the somewhat on the offset of the beginning of the COVID quarantine lockdown.
Yep.
I had completed essentially half of my last semester in quarantine. So it was definitely somewhat of a rude awakening and a new way to enter the workforce. So they had us all working from home, and given the nature of the job that you did, you would sometimes have to go to the office or the plant rather, because I started as a process engineer, and it was definitely interesting. You didn't get the typical like go in the first day, meet everybody, meet your boss. Everything was pretty much done via webcam, similar to what we're doing right now. Um, and it has its pros and cons, like all things do. Some people liked it, some people didn't, and I feel like it just kind of highlighted more of the types of, I guess, work that you do depending on your role and company that you're at, and of course the nature of the individuals there as well,
Yeah.
right? Because some jobs are easier to do remotely while others are near to impossible to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, as a process engineer, and as a Dow employee, we managed to make it work. If you know, I would say 2021 and even 2020 was a really, really great year for Dow as far as performance and what the company
Hmm.
did. So they were one of the examples of being able to adapt, basically, and adapt well um, on a global scale in the workforce.
Yeah.
So, um, I would say the biggest initial shock for me as an individual making that segue was maybe the shock. This might be a little bit off the beaten path, but just like the shock of how relaxed and just calm everything kind of was.
Yeah.
You I come from a background where I'm commuting to school
Yeah.
like Monday through Friday. I'm an engineering student. All my classes are super difficult.
Yeah.
I'm working
E-
part time, or go ahead.
Everything's structured, right? Everything's
Everything
structured.
everything is structured.
Yeah.
There's a schedule and period for every single aspect of your life, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I'm working part time, waiting tables and whatnot. So it's just like just going from all that controlled chaos to having a good job, having a different type of structure, and having like this self-paced online self-development plan, which is pretty much like what my initial role fell into, you know, um, it's very easy to kind of like ease off the gas in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Mhm. And I
And,
wasn't expecting that.
and one thing I think that I want you to kind of touch on, and not a lot of folks realize, it's not an instant, you graduate and then you start your job, right? I think when I graduated and I started my job, I realized that there's a little bit of a time period um, in between that, right?
Yeah.
And they don't really tell you about that in school. Like,
No. Yeah.
the bills still have to be paid.
Yep.
Um, you don't get your first paycheck until 3, 4 weeks after you start your job.
Yeah.
So, was that part of that initial shock? Like, hey, I'm not, I graduated, I have my degree in hand, but it's not, it's not started yet. Life hasn't started yet, really.
Yeah, that's definitely something to highlight, and I'm glad you bring that up because there's little things like that that you kind of overlook in that phase. But definitely being someone that was new, that's something that you had to adjust to, right?
Yeah,
Um, I will say the buffer to that is maybe having some types of internship or co-op experience because it's kind of synonymous in that, right? Like you don't initially get your first paycheck until a couple of weeks in, and then they'll typically prorate it and whatnot
yeah,
depending on your start date and everything.
yeah.
So that definitely happened to me. I had a bit of a unique situation. Like I moved out before I even started before I graduated. Uh,
Hmm.
I moved out like when the lockdown initially began. So I lived with some colleagues for a brief period of time, and
Hmm.
I couldn't work, right? So I was one of those people in the workforce. Well, they had basically told us we can't employ you anymore. But if you file for unemployment, you'll be able to like get money that you can use to pay bills and everything, which is essentially what I had to do. So I had to
Wow.
figure that out. And I had to also be intelligent with the unemployment money that I was getting.
Yeah,
Because, anytime depending on the situation, like when you're getting money from the government and whatnot, I always keep in the back of mind, like I'm gonna have to pay this back in some way, shape, or form.
yeah,
They're gonna get it back in blood, as they say.
yeah,
So with that in mind, I was just a bit more intelligent going in. I remember specifically, and this is one thing I would advise every single person that's going to graduate. Depending on who you bank with, you might have to pay, but definitely speak to a financial advisor.
yeah,
uh, I set up a meeting. I'll never forget this. It was February 11th of 2020. I went to Bank of America and I met with a gentleman. I won't say his name, but he's working in the Merrill Lynch side of things now. So he had gone from that, brick and mortar location to their investment group.
yeah,
And I told him my situation. I said, hey, I'm going to be graduating with a degree. In a few months, I'll be making this much money. This is how much debt I'm in. I want to have a financial plan to move forward as far as like getting out of that debt and then becoming a net positive. So that was my plan. That's definitely something that's not typical. And that's something I strongly recommend to people who are about to graduate because then you're already kind of prepping yourself for the money that you're going to be getting, right?
yeah, yeah,
And you can, it definitely helped as far as like managing the unemployment money intelligently, and then also being smart about like moving into a new apartment, relocating, and also being able to take care of myself and bills before I got that first initial Dow paycheck.
yeah, yeah. I think that's big. For me, you know, graduating and starting my new job, the timing was just so I basically ran out of money as soon as I got my first paycheck. So I mean, it was fine at the end of the day, because I got my first paycheck and things were okay. But no one, at least for me in college, taught me the importance of, heck, even what healthcare plan to select, what a 401k, what what elections to make on your 401k. How much do you do Roth? How much do you do non-Roth? And this can be a good segue into the next topic I wanted to touch on a lot of us, we do very technical degrees in college. A lot of our listeners are probably looking into doing engineering or healthcare or something in a STEM related field.
Right.
So the degrees in themselves are very technical, but a lot of times the work we do when we graduate may not be as technical as our degrees. And then on top of that, a lot of the life skills that you need, like money management in this case, is not technical at all.
Yeah.
So, was there an initial shock in relation to how much you used your your college degree versus how much life skills that you didn't have based on the fact that your degree was so technical and you didn't have time to take some of those business classes or some of those money management classes?
Um, a bit, right? Like, even though I had taken the steps to talk to people who knew about those things, there's definitely the part where you're dealing with it on your own, right? You mentioned like 401ks and Roth IRAs. Very thankful for setting up those meetings with that gentleman as
Hmm.
far as like getting that financial information and basically prepping myself. He made an example as far as like bills and everything. Like, it's like your pocket, your wallet's a sieve, right? And the money is going through. Everything that's falling through is like your expenses.
Hmm.
Um, and then taking the technical background, like being an engineering student, and then going and working and having all these bills and everything, and then also doing your job. I would say that I was a bit fortunate, and also pointed as far as like the role that I got, because I'm a chemical engineering graduate,
Hmm.
and I really wanted to. In my mind, it made sense to get a job that closely related to my degree. So
Hmm.
you would hear process engineer, process engineer, process engineer as a student. But if you didn't do a process engineering internship or something similar, you wouldn't really know how that translated. And I'm talking simple stuff like P&IDs, like working on things like that. Like, I could just saying P&IDs, unless you've been a process engineer or worked in that field, you might not even
Yeah,
know what that means off the top of your head, right? And
exactly,
it's
exactly.
it's little things like that. So, I always tell people, I'm like, man, with my process engineering job, it related so closely to school. It's like I never left senior design. It's like it
Yeah,
just kept going
yeah,
into my career. So, and then you realize, like, okay, you know what is the plan as far as developing, right? I'm a young professional now. There's more worlds to conquer, unlike Alexander the Great. Like, so you have
yeah,
the opportunity to create a plan and a path forward, and it might not actually mirror that initial goal or desire that you thought for yourself. You
yeah,
life is dynamic. You're allowed to pivot and change.
yeah,
So, I think that, although it was similar in a regard, it was definitely different as far as the different types of projects that came across my desk, and then the different sites that I went to when I
yeah,
started.
yeah. Yeah, now you're, what, two and a half, almost 3 years out of graduation, right? And you mentioned you recently started a new role.
Hmm.
Sounds like in supply chain.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's a career transition, right? You went from a very technical role that's very much related to your degree to now something that you know you're still in the chemical field, so there's still knowledge that you're still using from your degree, but now it seems like it's in the more business realm. And a lot of folks go through that transition. A lot of young professionals do that, right? In the first couple of years, that's the time that you need to be able to figure out what you want to do for the rest of your career. So, can you touch on that a little bit and your, let's say, your decision making there, and what are some inflection points that led you to make that decision that hey, maybe you want to branch it to a different direction in your career, and you're 2.5 years in, so this is kind of the time to do that.
Right. So, I saw this quote earlier, and it said, "When you're clever, you want to change the world, and then when you realize that you're wise, you want to change yourself."
Hmm.
Hence, moving to take that pivot and then go in a different direction, right? Um, as a young, still fresh out of high school graduate, told myself I want to have a strong technical background and then potentially become a political figure. That was my goal. You've got Obama playing basketball in the background. I don't know if you can see that, but
Yeah.
that was the idea. Maybe do like be an engineer, but also a politician because you don't have a lot of those.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
realizing, okay, how did I get myself through school? I bartended, I tutored,
Yeah.
I waited tables. So I formulated these people skills as far as like, servicing individuals and whatnot and giving them an experience. So when you take that and you marry it to potentially like getting a job opportunity and working in a corporate setting, I found, okay, I'm not really finding much joy in this technical background and this technical work, but it's still giving me that basis and that foundation, being able to digest and absorb very detailed and intricate projects and work, and then being able to find solutions, being able to give people options as far as like, this is the problem that you're having, and based off of the nature of said problem, you have options A through C that are viable because of maybe pricing, reliability, and other things of that nature. And you kind of just work with them to figure out the best option for them.
Yeah.
The technical expertise and support guy. Uh,
Yeah.
but then saying like, I don't want to do this long term. I would much rather work in an area that's much more customer facing, where I'm using those skills that I basically worked on and developed on the side outside of my formal education as a
Hmm.
bartender, as a waiter, and even as a tutor. Um, and just developing that because I've already developed that to a degree in so many years. Let me now do it in a professional setting,
Yeah.
and let me also take the brief stint that I had as an engineer and basically just work in a more commercial side of things. And I had an opportunity within my company because I work for Dow Chemical and
Yeah.
did just recently make that change. So um, it's basically having that having the wherewithal to know what I innately have as an ability and a skill set, and then choosing a niche area in order to develop that with the other skills that I developed in an area which might not have been my end goal, but still like kind of basically taking the best parts of me, putting it to work, and then continuing to nurture it as I move forward.
Yeah. And that's a really important point. And I think a lot of first gen students, especially ones that are in technical degrees, it's such a mountain that you're climbing. When you're a freshman and then you become a junior, sophomore, sorry, sophomore, junior, then senior. Um, when you finally graduate, it feels like you made it, right? And you did. But I think what a lot of folks realize, and it sounds like you've realized that, 3 years in, is that that's the foundation. But that doesn't, dictate that you're going to do that for the rest of your career. Really, those experiences that you have in the workforce the first couple of years dictate what you truly want to do. It's kind of like getting a medical degree, but then doing a specialization after you figure out what you want to do, right?
Yeah,
And in this case, that's what you're doing.
yeah,
And taking back on this topic, one of the things that I really want to do for our listeners is give them some like tangible things that they can take away from, and that's a good let's say transition into the kind of the later part of this the conversation that I want to touch on is let's say you had the opportunity to go back in time and go to Collins, let's say the final day of school, the day you're graduating, the day you're getting your diploma, and with the knowledge that you've gained now in the last 3 years post graduation, what are some things you would tell your old self or your, let's say, back in time self, things to look out for, things to do differently based on what you know now?
um, excellent, excellent point. Basically just keep your resume up to date as much as possible. Not so much focusing too much on it, but make sure you're doing viable work that can translate healthily to your resume concerning the
Hmm.
work that you're doing right now. Um, be more aggressive in seeking those opportunities. And then on the
Hmm.
financial aspect of things, like stay the course as far as paying off your debts. You could stand to be a bit more aggressive in that regard, and then just limit your expenses. Lifestyle inflation is very, very real, and albeit fun, at the end of the day, everyone has to answer for what they did. So,
Yep.
what they do, and if you formulate bad habits, it'll be hard to break.
Yep.
So, at that point, I had not come into that money, and I was already in a good position to, you know, basically adhere to all of these things that I would tell myself. But I would just really like focus on staying the course and also taking care of your health and whatnot, right? Really,
Yeah.
really like learn more about the benefits that your company offers you so that you can maximize on those, whether it's retirement and then healthcare and insurance. Definitely, definitely, definitely maximize that to where you are getting the most benefit both financially and savings wise, right? I'm talking HSA, I'm talking healthcare as far as high deductible, low deductible. Definitely take care of that and stay on top of that sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And one thing that I realized kind of, and I'm sure you did as well. There's people out there in companies that are super excited about giving you advice on these things, right?
yes,
The first day I joined, and I remember I didn't know what the heck a Roth was, and instead of just struggling through it and potentially picking the wrong thing, I just went and asked my coworker. I mean, he was in his 30s at the time, and I was like, "Hey, man, what is this?" And he was so excited about scheduling an hour of my time and walking me through what that was. And I noticed a lot of folks that come out of school and come into the workforce initially might be a little scared to ask these questions because it might maybe seem like they're like novices or they don't want to be judged. But really, a lot of folks now, I can say, my age, in their late 20s, we really want to help folks that come graduate, come out of college, because we know how it was like when we were there,
right,
and we want to be able to impart our knowledge onto them. So
right.
that's a really important point, I think.
100%. And I'm definitely one of those people. Like I was one of those people even when I was in college, like, because I took up tutoring, and I always wanted to kind of like be some type of leader to the people like around me, basically. And I tell my relatively younger siblings that, hey, you've got our parents that went to college like 20, 30 years ago, and then you've got me that literally just graduated. So use me as a resource as far as like the things that I'm telling you to look out for, because it's much more apparent, and the things that I'm talking about are things that are happening in real time versus things that might have changed in the past few decades. So that's definitely a big point. Don't be shy when it comes to asking questions, because you're just a bachelor at that point, literally, because you're getting your bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
You're young, you're not expected to know these things, but you
Yep.
are expected to be hungry and ask for that knowledge. So
Yep.
uh, just be an empty cup.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that last point really sums up this conversation well. And I kind of want to take this time to thank you, Collins, for your time and
Pleasure.
a
Thanks for
lot of the energy today, because this is a really important topic. And I hope that some of our listeners will take away some really good advice that you've given them from our conversation. And with that, I kind of want to wrap the episode up. And once again, thank you for taking the time, and looking forward to more conversations soon.
cheers as always,
All right.
man. Thank you, Adnan.